During our class videos, you may hear our poets and playwrights use terms that are new to you. We have created a list of key terms and definitions that you can refer to at any point during our video lectures. This list is available on the Videos and Readings class page, where you can read it or download it as a PDF. If you would like to find and review these terms while you watch each class video, you can stop this video, go back to the Videos and Readings class page, and download the PDF. There you can play this video and each of the following class videos. If you have any questions about these terms, we encourage you to ask your teaching team in the weekly class discussions.
Elsa Menendez is a writer, director, producer, and performer with Trick Lock Company. She has written solo shows including The Last 3 Minutes of Happiness, Cloud Cover or Conversations with Harry, and Shipwreck. She is the Director of Education at the National Hispanic Cultural Center and has spent more than 35 years working in theater around the world.
So hello, my name is Elsa Menendez, and I am the Education Director and Incoming Performing Arts Director at the National Hispanic Cultural Center in Albuquerque, New Mexico. And I'm also an artistic core member of a theater company in Albuquerque called Trick Lock Company. And we are a 24-year-old theater company that works predominantly in creating our own shows, our own plays. So it's a style that's now referred to as devised theater. It was previously referenced often as a kind of ensemble created work. We do have playwrights in our company, but we really do tend to veer in the direction of devising together, of bringing multiple voices in and multiple writers into a situation. So I'm going to talk a little bit about our process and specifically about the idea of how we tend to bring a lot of social issues and community issues into our work, not with the intent of being dogmatic in any one direction, but with the intention of just responding to what's going on around us. So typically we have between 2 and 4 pieces of work in development at any one time. And the generation of those pieces often comes because one or more members of the company are struck by something going on. So a recent example would be that several of us started hearing about the impending kind of pressures around immigration, and Albuquerque is a town of many immigrants, that was bubbling up before the election. The focus obviously on immigration, and specifically on this idea of borders and creating walls. And so we started having a conversation about the impact on that dialogue in our community, and then also about what this country, says it's based on, which is this influx of and this open-armed perspective. And it started a conversation also around the idea of borders and boundaries and how we draw those and create those. And lo and behold, we started to talk about creating a show that looked at this idea of immigration. And we started just sort of bouncing around ideas. And so that's kind of where I would suggest starting, is that when somebody has an idea that feels like it vibrates enough in yourself to sort of keep coming up in your thoughts or in conversation, and then when in conversation it seems to strike a chord in someone else, especially if you're collaborating, then it's often true that you're onto something. And if you're uncomfortable talking about it, it means you're really onto something. Once that conversation starts, what we do is we get in the room and we get around a table and we just start dialoguing. What are our associations that come up around this idea of immigration or around borders or boundaries? To keep using that example, what does it pull up for us? And very quickly, if you give yourself the space to have a conversation, and that's something I highly recommend, is creating spaciousness in a collaborative dialogue, meaning you spend several hours together and you just let things kind of flow. It's often useful to have one person who's trying to keep a sense of guiding the conversation around whatever subject. Once that conversation is going, then things start to pop up: images, people's personal stories, somebody you know in the community who works in that arena. And for us, one of the things that popped up regularly in that dialogue early on was the image of the Statue of Liberty and her title as the Mother of Exiles. And that then led to a look at and some research into her origins, the language around her, the language on the actual statue. And before you knew it, our piece was called Mother of Exiles. And that then led to further conversations, and again, the beginnings of gathering stories and doing a deeper sense of research, and or deeper level of research, not a sense. So the process for us evolved in that way. An idea came up. We created space to have conversation about it. It led to research, and then we came back into a sort of studio situation, or an open space, and together began to kind of riff off of the images and ideas that were coming up. So just to sort of go back again, just very briefly. I personally feel as a solo creator that my experience of trying to create a socially relevant piece of work is much richer. Even if I decide that I'm going to be the sole writer or guide of that piece or creator of that piece, it's much richer if I'm in dialogue or collaboration at various stages in the process. As an ensemble that devises work together, that is an imperative for us. And so what happens is we go from the idea to the conversation to the research to back into the sort of studio or the laboratory, if you will. And once we're back in the laboratory, we start to play together. And I think, again, regardless of what the subject matter is, even if it's a very intense or dark or impactful or painful subject matter, the need to be able to come and sort of jam together like a band would jam, or play together like we might reference in theater, I think is also really important. And how that works is often one or two people in the collaboration will come up with a set of parameters or ideas that they can assign to the group to just experiment with. And we call that work moment work in our arena, and it's called moment work in many people's arenas, and it stems from a long lineage of various and sundry styles. But for us, what that means is we get into a room and we go, okay, we're going to divide into smaller groups, and we're going to each create a moment, and that moment is going to have this set of parameters. It's going to use no verbal language in this first iteration. It's going to involve some image that relates specifically to the idea of immigration, maybe transportation, and it's going to last no more than 2 minutes, and someone's going to leave the ground, and whatever the parameters. And we go off and spend 25 or 35 minutes creating. We come back, we see what's there, we see what stimulates out of that, what conversation stimulates, and we begin to try to make links back to, again, the subject. And that's kind of one way of sort of generating work. Another thing that we like to do is we like to or I like to, and my company likes to, go into, again, whatever area you're creating in, to go into a level of research where you're connecting with people who have had direct experience or are experts in that field or practitioners in that field, and really get their voices and go into it really openly and honestly. Another example of a piece we worked on recently is called Her Murder Ballad. It generated out of a fascination with the fact that there's a genre of American folk music that is, or traditional music that is murder ballads, and most of them focus on violence to women, or they're about murdering women, or there are very few of them, but there are a few that are also about women who murder. So we got interested in that, and what it led to was a dialogue about women and violence, and women as victims of violence, and women as perpetrators of violence, and the way that our culture elevates both in very equal way and glamorizes both in very equal ways. So we had this whole dialogue about women and violence, and we decided to approach a program in Albuquerque that was working with women coming out of jails and working with women who have histories of pretty intensive traumatic experiences of violence, again, both as survivors and also as people who have committed violence. And we approached that organization and asked if they would be willing to let us come into one of their group meetings and over a series of weeks and just talk and get some feedback. And we did that. And so for 4 weeks, we went into these group sessions and we had dialogues with women about their experiences of committing violence and their experiences of receiving violence, and we shared very openly what we were planning to do with this dialogue and asked their permission, of course, to be able to bring their voices, if not in direct quote, but at least in feeling, into the story we were working on. And we received permission from everyone to do that. And so that allowed us then to we did a little bit of recording of those sessions, and we also just did some note-taking, but it allowed us to bring those voices really directly into the context of creating that show. And so maybe out of the whole 55-minute piece that we ended up creating, there were 1 or 2 literal lines that might have been a pretty direct link to that experience, but bringing those voices with us impacted the way that we were able to fill out the world that we were creating. Another curiosity that I was asked to consider is the idea of when is it time? When is the piece ready to share with an audience? And for me, first of all, I think it's really valuable to invite an audience into your process, the developmental process of your piece. And I think it's valuable to do that at various stages. So again, for my company, we are sometimes developing a piece for a year or 2 before we have a full run of it. And we will invite audiences at various stages to come and hear a reading, come and see a loose staging, or come and see a 20-minute excerpt that we've staged as completely as we can, and then to offer feedback. And it's true that you can get too many voices in your head, but I think it's worth going to those developmental audience moments when you and your collaborators can't answer the questions that you're having about the piece. So, if you can't figure out anymore how something is landing in terms of an emotional experience for an audience, then it's time to bring in the audience and see how it's landing for them and get that feedback. And I also was asked to address the possibility of what happens if you're working on a piece and the subject or the topic shifts. New information is coming in. The importance of one kind of set of ideas has shifted to another set of ideas. What do you do? I think that's true of everything and anything, that you're going to find that there is this evolution of what's out in the world socially and people's perspectives on it. And so, I think it's important to be adaptable and to allow a piece to have a life to it that means you can kind of go back in and look at or tinker with an outcome, an interaction. I think it's valuable to keep a set of notes around ideas that didn't make it in, and that's very important as well. When you're creating a new piece, you throw everything onto the table, and you've got to be willing to throw everything onto the table, and you have to be willing to let a bunch of things go. But it doesn't mean you have to throw them out. It means you have to put them in a box maybe or on a page, and know that as your piece has a life, that there's a possibility that you might come back to that set of ideas because the world around you is also suggesting that there's more information that you can bring into the conversation. Another example for me, just specifically, is that my company wrote a piece 15 years ago that was about Billy the Kid, ostensibly, but it was really also about this idea of nature versus nurture. And it was coming up around the time of the Littleton, Colorado shootings at the high school with these two young men that went in and, massacred and were ultimately killed as well. So we were looking at this idea of violence and young people and what causes somebody to turn to gun violence. And, so there were parallels, there were imagistic parallels that we made in that piece. Well, that piece has a whole different potential life in a world where the number of those examples of young people taking guns to schools and has expanded enormously. And what does it mean now to do a piece on nature versus nurture? And when somebody is drawn to violence as a way of finding their importance in the world, or their desperation leads to that, what does that mean now versus what it meant 15 years ago? It's a pretty different conversation. So how could we update or allow in these different levels of those now lived experiences of this country in terms of young men and violent reactions? So that's a bunch right there. That's a bunch of thoughts and ideas. And for me, the key points are about being willing to bring other people into the room to collaborate and doing research and allowing yourself a variety of different ways to physicalize and spark your writing as you work to create the environment or the world that you're striving to create.